You've arrived at Cozy Side Audio, where dreams begin with a story. Whether you're studying, journaling, or just chilling, this one's for you. If you vibe with this kind of content, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe for more.
Cozy Side Audio presents A Song for the City. Chapter 1. Cornerstone. The corner was nothing special to most people. A cracked piece of sidewalk, a leaning street lamp with a bulb that buzzed and hummed on damp nights, and a crosswalk where the painted white lines had long since faded into faint ghosts on the asphalt. Yet to the guitarist, this patch of pavement was as familiar and necessary as a front porch, or the pews in a church. For more than a decade, it had been his place in the world. The city flowed past him in waves. The mornings carried office workers with their coffee cups in purposeful strides. Afternoons brought students, mothers with strollers, delivery trucks, and the occasional lost tourist staring at their phone. Evenings changed the rhythm again. Men in loosened ties, couples dressed for dinner, streetlights clicking on in sequence, and the chatter of those who had nowhere urgent to be. Through all of it, he sat on a simple folding stool, with his guitar resting across his knee, hands steady on the strings, letting his music rise above the sound of footsteps, horns, and conversations. He had grown used to being noticed and unnoticed all at once. Some people dropped a coin or a crumpled bill into the open guitar case without slowing down. Others glanced at him with vague acknowledgement, the way one might regard a streetlight or a mailbox. And then there were those who paused. Not many, but enough. They let the music catch them, if only for a moment. He remembered them more than anyone else. His fingers moved almost without thought, coaxing old folk tunes, quiet ballads, and melodies that he'd written and forgotten and rediscovered again. He didn't play for fame or for crowds. Those ambitions had slipped through his grasp long ago. Now he played to keep something alive, though he couldn't always say what that something was. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was dignity. Or maybe it was simply the stubborn need to keep breathing sound into the world. Across the street, the cafe opened its windows to let in the late morning sun. A barista leaned on the counter, head tilted, half listening while wiping down glasses. The guitarist had learned long ago not to expect applause. The city didn't clap, it absorbed. His job, if it was a job at all, was to send music into the air and let it land where it would. He thought about how the seasons marked his corner more clearly than calendars. In the winter, his fingers stiffened and burned as he played, even inside half-worn gloves. In the spring, cherry blossoms drifted down like soft applause, sticking to his guitar case and clinging to his hair. Summer was alive with noise, buses sighing at stops, the smell of food carts, children darting through fountains. Autumn was his favorite. Crisp evenings, orange leaves skittering across the crosswalk, and the kind of melancholy light that made his slow songs fit the air. This corner had been witness to his quiet existence. He remembered the first time he set up there, 10 years back. He was younger then, though not young enough to be foolish. He had already known failure, knew it in the hollow of his chest and the bitterness that curled around his ribs. He had chosen this spot at random, though in the years since he had told himself it was fate. Somehow the city kept letting him return, as though it understood that a man needed at least one place that would not push him away. He had watched people grow up here. The boy with the oversized backpack who used to stare wide-eyed at him, then vanish for years before reappearing taller, sharper, older. The young couple who once danced barefoot on the sidewalk to one of his songs, their laughter echoing louder than his chords. The older woman who sat silently at the curb, not speaking, not moving, until her eyes brimmed with something unspoken and she finally rose to leave. Faces without names, but imprinted on him like verses of a song. He never asked who they were. That wasn't his role. He provided music. They brought their lives. And for a moment the two touched. That was enough. Today was a day like any other. The morning sun slid between the buildings, laying golden stripes across the pavement. His guitar was tuned, though its body bore scars, scratches, a cigarette burn near the edge, a crack he'd patched himself with glue. The case lay open at his feet, a few coins glinting among the felt lining. He began with something slow, a melody he'd carried for years. The song was nameless. Most of his were. He thought of them less as pieces to be titled than as fragments of himself, notes that had found him when he needed them most. He let it drift out across the intersection, past the steady flow of pedestrians. A young woman carrying textbooks slowed near the corner. She tilted her head, lingered for 2 beats longer than necessary, then moved on. That was how it usually went. A pause, a glance. Then life moved forward again. But those pauses mattered. He told himself that often. Sometimes he believed it. There was an old man who sometimes came by around this hour. He wore a gray cap pulled low, a cane tapping in rhythm with each step. Without fail, he would stop, listen for a minute, and then nod once as though affirming something. The guitarist looked for him now, half expecting to see him at the edge of the crowd. But the man didn't come today. Maybe tomorrow. The city kept its own rhythm. You couldn't rush it. He kept playing. His mind wandered as it often did, tracing back through memories. The smell of dust in rehearsal rooms long abandoned. The way his hands had once ached from playing sets too long, too hard, too late into the night. The silence after it all fell apart. He thought of these things less as regrets and more as shadows, always present, always stretching behind him. Yet the corner gave him something those old days hadn't. Continuity. The assurance that, no matter how small, his music still had a place. A child tugged at his mother's hand, pointing at the guitar. The guitarist offered a faint smile without breaking the melody. The mother dropped a quarter into the case. The boy stared as though watching magic. For the briefest moment, the guitarist felt taller than he was, steadier than he was, as if the music might outlast him. Wise. He shifted into another tune, one brighter than the last, though still tinged with that softness he couldn't ever shake from his playing. Above, a flock of pigeons scattered from a rooftop, their wings beating in unison. The city roared on, buses exhaling at their stops, crosswalk signals chirping, voices weaving through one another. But here on the corner, a man and his guitar carved out a pocket of stillness. This was where the story began, not in grandeur, not in applause, but in the simple truth of a man sitting on cracked pavement, strumming songs into the morning air, and believing, against his doubts, that someone might carry those notes with them long after they'd gone. Chapter 2. Faces without names. He never asked their names. It wasn't out of rudeness or disinterest, but because it seemed unnecessary. The corner gave him a peculiar sort of intimacy with strangers, a closeness without details. They walked into his songs carrying burdens, joys, and private stories he was never meant to know. To ask for a name would have been to cross a line, to make it something else. What he remembered were faces, expressions caught in passing, postures leaning toward or away from him, the way eyes softened or turned inward when a chord struck just right. He carried those impressions the way others might carry photographs in their wallets. There was the boy with the round cheeks and perpetually slipping backpack straps. Years ago, he had stopped one afternoon in the rain, his math test clutched in his hands. The guitarist remembered the paper drooping with dampness, the angry red ink scrawled across the top. The boy had stood there, shoulders shaking, while the guitarist played a slow melody, something simple, meant to comfort. The boy never spoke. He just let the music hold him for a while before trudging off. The guitarist never forgot the look on his face, the wounded pride, the fear of disappointing someone unseen. Years later, he saw the same boy again, taller, sharper around the jaw, wearing a suit too mature for his age. He had only walked by, not stopping, not recognizing. But the guitarist had recognized him, always. Then there was the couple. They had danced barefoot on his corner one humid July night. The street lamps glowed weakly, moths circling in their halos of light. The guitarist had been playing something lively, a tune he half made up on the spot, and the woman had tugged at the man's arm. They had swayed first, then spun, laughing as their shoes clattered against the curb. Cars honked as they passed, but the couple didn't care. When the guitarist looked back years later, he wondered if they were still together, if the dance had been the beginning or the middle or the last of something. People often thought love stories were linear, but he knew better. He remembered the silent woman most of all. She had sat down on the curb one evening. No words, no gestures, just her presence. She stayed for almost an hour, her gaze steady but far away, her hands folded in her lap. The music seemed to sink into her like water into dry soil. He had played for her more carefully than for anyone else, not to impress, but to honor whatever she carried. When she finally rose, her face was damp, though her eyes had softened. She had given him no coin, no nod, no acknowledgement beyond her silence. And yet he carried her with him like a question he'd never answer. Sometimes he wondered why these fragments mattered to him. He wasn't their friend or their family. He was just the man with a guitar on the corner. Yet these encounters rooted him, gave his days shape. While others measured life in promotions or children's milestones or vacations, he measured his in faces and fleeting glances, in the echoes of laughter and tears carried off by the wind. The city was relentless in its forgetting. Streets changed, shops closed, buildings rose where empty lots had been. Even regular passers-by vanished without explanation. He'd see someone every morning for a year, then never again. No goodbyes, no reasons. The corner kept him grounded, but the faces reminded him that nothing stayed. There was another man he recalled, a delivery driver who often passed during his late afternoon shift. He wore the same blue cap, his shoulders hunched with fatigue. One winter evening, the driver had stopped, leaned against his truck, and listened with his eyes closed, his breath fogging in the cold. When the song ended, he gave the guitarist $1 and whispered, "That's the best thing I've heard all day." Then he drove away. The guitarist never saw him again, but he remembered. He remembered them all, in ways that sometimes surprised him. When he closed his eyes at night, faces drifted back, attached not to names but to melodies. The boy's tears lived in a minor key. The couple's laughter pulsed in a fast strum. The woman's silence hummed in a lingering note. Each person left behind a fragment of song, and together they formed something larger than he realized at the time. There was comfort in this, though also a sorrow he rarely admitted. Comfort in knowing his music was heard, even if only for a moment. Sorrow in knowing he was not part of their stories beyond that moment. They carried on without him, weaving lives he'd never see. He stayed, constant, on the corner. On certain nights when the crowd thinned and the air grew quiet, he let himself imagine otherwise. He pictured the boy grown and confident, telling someone years later, "There was this man who played guitar when I thought the world was ending. He kept me going." He pictured the couple telling their children, "We once danced in the street to a stranger's song, and that's how we knew we were in love." He imagined the silent woman whispering to someone, "That night saved me, though I never told him." He didn't know if these stories were true. He only knew they could be. That possibility was enough to keep him returning to the corner. Late that afternoon, a gust of wind carried a flyer across the pavement. It slapped against his guitar case before tumbling onward. He didn't bother to read it. Flyers came and went, sales, concerts, causes, promises. What mattered was the steady rhythm of footsteps and the faces that glanced his way, even briefly. A boy stopped near him, not the same as years ago, but another child altogether, holding an ice cream cone that melted down his wrist. He stared openly at the guitar, his mouth slightly open. The guitarist slowed his strumming, shifting into something softer. The boy grinned. His mother tugged him forward, and they disappeared into the crowd. Another face, another fragment, another song written in silence. As dusk approached, the street lamps flickered on. The guitarist's hands ached from hours of playing, but he continued. The day would end soon, but tomorrow the city would bring him new faces. He would forget their names before learning them, but their expressions would stay. That was his gift and his burden, to remember without ever truly knowing. And as he closed his eyes, letting the final chord hang in the cooling air, he thought again of the truth he had carried for years. That sometimes the most important connections were the briefest, and sometimes the people who mattered most were the ones you never really met. Chapter 3. The Weight of Silence. The guitar went back into its case with the care one gives a fragile animal. The guitarist's hands, cracked at the knuckles, slid over the worn wood before snapping the clasps shut. By then, the sidewalks had thinned. The day's rush slowed to a trickle of late commuters and the odd wanderer with nowhere particular to be. He had played until the light turned orange and then dimmed into gray. Some days he stayed later, pushing into night, when the neon signs hummed alive and the sidewalks filled with laughter spilling from bars. But tonight, the ache in his fingers told him enough. He gathered his stool, slung the strap of the guitar case over his shoulder, and walked the 2 blocks to where his apartment sat wedged above a laundromat. The stairs smelled of detergent and rust. The building itself leaned in the way old things lean, as if tired of holding itself together. His room was on the 2nd floor, a 1-room space with peeling paint and a radiator that rattled like bones. The bed was a thin mattress folded against the wall to leave room for the small table. There was no television, no radio, no stacks of books, just the guitar case, the stool, and a kettle for tea. He didn't mind the sparseness, or maybe he told himself that so often he had come to believe it. A man could grow used to almost anything, especially when the days carried him forward with music. But when the door shut behind him at night, silence rushed in so quickly it startled him still. He set down the guitar case and filled the kettle with water from the tap. The metal hissed as it heated. He sat on the stool, hands loose on his knees, listening to the creaks of the building. From below came the thud of washers and dryers, spinning endlessly. He thought about how many people depended on machines like that to carry their lives forward. Clothes for work, uniforms for school, sheets to warm their children. He wondered if anyone depended on his music in the same way. He thought of the boy with the test, the couple who danced, the silent woman. Maybe they had depended on him for an hour, or even for a single song. But could a man call that enough? Could he build a life out of brief intersections, never knowing if his music stayed with them? The kettle whistled. He poured the water over a bag of tea, steam rising into the small room. He held the cup with both hands, feeling the heat soak into his palms. It was an old habit, the way he savored warmth. When you spent years playing in the cold, fingers stiff, wind biting your cheeks, you learned to treasure even the smallest comforts. The walls offered him nothing back. He sipped, then set the cup down, listening again to the quiet. Loneliness didn't come as a sharp pain. It came as a slow weight, the kind that settled in your bones and made itself at home. Some nights he didn't notice it at all. Other nights it pressed against him until the room felt too small to hold it. He tried not to dwell on the past, though it lived with him more faithfully than any neighbor. He remembered smoky bars where his songs were once met with applause. He remembered voices calling his name, asking for more. He remembered believing he was on the edge of something larger than a corner, larger than himself. And then he remembered the silence that followed, when the calls stopped, when the doors closed, when he was left carrying a guitar case and not much else. He never spoke about that time, to anyone. The corner had become his absolution, his penance, his second chance. But even a man who finds peace in routine must face the quiet hours afterward. He set the cup aside and opened the guitar case again. His fingers brushed the strings softly, not to play but to reassure himself it was still there, that the music was waiting. It always was. He lay on the mattress, staring at the ceiling cracked in long, jagged lines. Through the thin wall, he could hear muffled laughter from someone's television, the rise and fall of voices belonging to lives more crowded than his. He thought of faces again, faces without names, faces that might have carried him with them. He wondered if, at this very moment, someone out there was telling his story without even knowing it. Sleep came late. When it did, it was filled with fragments. A boy crying, a couple spinning in the dark, a woman's wet eyes. Always faces, never names. Always songs without words. And when the morning light broke across the cracked blinds, the silence waited for him, steady as ever, reminding him that the city might know his music, but it did not know him. Chapter 4. The season turns. The first signs of change came in the air. The guitarist noticed it in the mornings, when the sunlight fell a little paler across the sidewalks, when the breeze carried the faint edge of something sharper than summer. He played the same corner every day, but the city around him shifted with the seasons, and each shift reminded him how still his own life stood. In summer, the corner smelled of hot pavement, food carts, and the salt of sweat. Now, as autumn pressed its hand against the city, the air grew cooler, laced with roasted chestnuts from a vendor who set up near the bus stop. Jackets reappeared. The quick steps of office workers softened as they tucked hands into pockets. Leaves clung stubbornly to branches, their tips already burning with orange. He tuned his guitar and began to play, the notes threading into the changing air. People passed with the same urgency as always, but he could see their faces differently in this light, sharper, etched with fatigue, or briefly brightened by a song that seemed to carry them through their day. That morning, a woman in scrubs paused long enough to drop coins into his case. Her badge caught the light as she leaned down, and he glimpsed the shadows under her eyes. She gave him the kind of smile people give when they're too tired to hold anything more. He shifted into a softer melody for her, and though she didn't stay, he watched her shoulders straighten as she moved on. Another fragment, another song. Later, a group of school children hurried past, their voices tumbling over one another. One boy slowed, pulling at his mother's hand. He pointed openly at the guitar. The guitarist answered with a playful run of notes, something light, quick, almost like skipping stones across water. The boy laughed, eyes wide, but the mother tugged him along, already late. Still, the boy looked back until the corner turned. Faces came and went as they always did, but autumn seemed to make them clearer somehow. The cool air sharpened the outlines of things, made the music sound different even to his own ears, less loose, more deliberate, carrying weight. He remembered other autumns here. The couple who danced had been summer, but there were others tied to this season. A man in a long wool coat who once stopped to listen every evening after work, nodding as if counting the rhythm to himself. Or the girl who had carried textbooks so heavy her arms shook, who paused to breathe while his music softened her steps. He didn't know what had become of either of them, but every year, when the air turned cool again, he thought of them as if summoned back by the season itself. As the day stretched on, the wind picked up, rattling a newspaper against his stool. He pressed it down with his boot without missing a chord. That was the way of the city, noise pressing in from every direction, and yet the music making its own small space within it. In the afternoon, an older man carrying grocery bags slowed to listen. His hair was white, his shoulders bent, but he tapped his foot gently, his lips moving as though silently singing along. The guitarist wondered what song the man heard, his own notes, or some memory the music had stirred. When the song ended, the man lifted 2 fingers in a quiet salute, then moved on. Evening came earlier now. The sun slipped behind the buildings before he was ready, and the shadows stretched long across the pavement. He played into the dusk, his fingers stiffening in the cool. A woman paused just long enough to wrap her scarf tighter and glance his way, her eyes soft, almost apologetic, before she disappeared into the crowd. He thought again of how the city kept moving forward while he stayed anchored here. Seasons shifted, children grew, couples aged, faces came and vanished. And yet every autumn he sat on the same stool, opened the same case and played the same strings. He told himself it was enough. He told himself the fragments mattered, and most days he believed it. When he finally rose, joints aching, the street lamps had already come on. The corner looked different under their glow, more fragile, almost tender. He slung the guitar over his shoulder and walked slowly back toward the laundromat. The city breathed around him, horns, footsteps, laughter, and he felt both part of it and apart from it. In his room, he opened the window a crack. The air slipped in cool and sharp. From somewhere far off, music drifted from a bar, muffled but insistent. He sat on the stool, staring out at the night, and thought of the people he had played for that day. The tired nurse, the laughing boy, the old man with the tapping foot. He wondered, not for the first time, if he was changing too, in ways too slow to notice. Chapter 5. The Return of a Familiar Face. The guitarist had been playing through the late afternoon, fingers moving slow and thoughtful over the strings. It wasn't a day for the faster songs, nor the cheerful ones people sometimes wanted on their way home from work. No, the sky had been gray since morning, and the air heavy with the promise of rain. His playing reflected that. A low, steady rhythm, not sorrowful, but weighted with the kind of patience you only learn after years of waiting. He'd seen fewer passers-by that day. Most hurried along, their eyes on the clouds, anxious to reach home before the storm came. The coins in his case were sparse, a scattering of silver and a few crumpled bills. He didn't mind. Not every day was about earning enough to carry him into tomorrow. Some days were just about playing, keeping the sound alive, holding on to the habit that had kept him steady all these years. His fingers lingered on a chord, letting it fade. The low hum of the city filled in around him, the stoplight changing, a bus groaning to a halt, voices of people rising and falling like tides. He leaned back against the wall, eyes closing for a moment, soaking in the soundscape. That was when he heard her voice. "Still here?" His eyes opened. At first he couldn't place her. She stood a few steps away, dressed in a slate blue coat, her hair tucked back neatly, a small leather bag hanging at her side. Her smile was cautious, but her eyes shone with recognition. "Do I know you?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "You played for me once," she said. "More than once, actually. Years ago." The guitarist studied her face. She was older now, of course, everyone was. He searched for the lines of memory beneath her features, the sharpness of the jaw, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. Then it clicked. "The student," he said quietly. "The one who cried." Her smile widened and she laughed in surprise. "You remember that?" "I remember faces," he said, lowering his guitar. "Not always names, but yes, I remember. You'd just come from an exam. You sat right there on the curb." Her cheeks flushed, but she nodded. "That was me. I'd failed a physics test. I thought it was the end of the world." "And I played something," he said half to himself. "You played that old tune, the one with the climbing notes?" I sat and listened until I could breathe again. The guitarist looked down at his guitar, fingers brushing the strings absent-mindedly. He hadn't thought about that day in years. For him, it was just another moment, one of thousands in a long blur of afternoons and evenings. But for her, it had stayed. "Seems like you did all right," he said, nodding toward her polished shoes, her professional bag. "I did," she said. "It wasn't the end of the world after all. I got through school. And now, well, I work not far from here. I've walked past you sometimes, though you probably didn't notice me." He tilted his head. "Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't." There was silence between them for a moment, filled only by the hiss of a bus door closing and the distant call of a street vendor. Then she stepped closer. "You probably don't realize how many people you've helped," she said softly. "Not just me. People come here, they hear you, and something changes. Even if just for a moment, you've been a constant." The guitarist felt a pang in his chest, like a string pulled too tight. He wasn't sure he believed her. To him, he was just a man with a guitar on a corner, filling the hours with sound. But her voice carried such certainty it was hard not to let it in. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Lena," she said. "I guess I never told you that." "Lena," he repeated. The name settled on his tongue, soft and familiar. "It's good to see you again." She smiled. "It's good to see you too." For a while, she lingered. She asked if she could sit, and he nodded toward the spot by his case. She folded herself down gracefully, her coat pooling around her. He played again, slow and quiet, while she listened. A light rain began to fall, tapping gently against the pavement, and she opened her umbrella, holding it so it covered them both. They stayed like that, sharing the small shelter, until the sky grew darker and the lamps on the street flickered to life. When she finally rose to leave, she touched his arm. "Thank you, for that day, and for this one too." He watched her walk away, her figure merging with the crowd. The rain came heavier, but he didn't move. He sat with his guitar in his lap, fingers stilled, feeling as though a part of the city had stepped out of memory and reminded him he wasn't as invisible as he sometimes thought. And though he wouldn't have said it aloud, He felt a quiet warmth settle inside him, one that lasted long after the corner emptied and the night folded in around him. Chapter 6. The Offer. The rain had come and gone overnight, washing the streets clean. When the guitarist arrived at his corner the next morning, the air was sharp with the scent of wet pavement and coffee drifting from the nearby cafe. Puddles still collected along the gutter, catching scraps of morning light. He liked mornings after rain. There was a freshness to them, as though the whole city had been pressed into new shape. He settled into his usual spot, case open at his feet, guitar resting against his chest. His fingers found their way into an easy rhythm, soft notes that fit the hour, gentle and unhurried. People moved past in their coats and scarves, some glancing at him, some not. A few coins fell into the case with muted clinks. He didn't count them. Counting made the day feel like labor. Instead, he let his eyes wander, catching on faces he half knew. The man who always bought 2 newspapers, the teenager with her skateboard, the barista from the cafe who smoked her first cigarette of the day, leaning against the doorframe. Familiar figures. They passed, and he played, and the morning stretched. By midday, the sun pushed through the clouds, warming the bricks at his back. He closed his eyes against the light, playing a tune he hadn't touched in years. Something lilting, with rises that reminded him of climbing staircases. He played it for himself, but when the applause came, it startled him. Not many people clapped on the corner. He opened his eyes. A man stood in front of him, tall, well-dressed, his suit cut clean and modern. His shoes gleamed even though the sidewalks were still damp. There was a watch on his wrist that caught the light like a small star. He was smiling, not mockingly, but with recognition. "You haven't changed much," the man said. The guitarist frowned, lowering his hands from the strings. He searched the man's face. Sharp features, dark hair streaked faintly with gray at the temples. The kind of face that carried both time and money. "Do I know you?" the guitarist asked. "You knew me once," the man said. "A long time ago. You played for me when I had nothing. I was just a kid then." The guitarist squinted, trying to thread memory into place. His life was full of fragments, faces, voices, small scenes. He didn't always manage to pull them together. The man gave a small laugh. "You probably don't remember. I sat right there on the curb. I'd lost my job. Thought I was finished. You played for me, and I swear it gave me the strength to get up and try again. I never forgot it." Slowly, the guitarist shook his head. "I don't remember your name." "Elias," the man said, offering his hand. "Elias Romero." The guitarist took it, the shake firm, unfamiliar. Elias's palm was warm, callus-free, the hand of someone who hadn't held a guitar or any instrument in years. But there was kindness in the grip. "I own a restaurant now," Elias continued, "not far from here. A little place that grew into something bigger. We're opening a second location downtown. I came looking for you." The guitarist frowned again. "Looking for me?" "Yes. I wanted to ask if you'd play for us, not just a night or two, a regular thing. We want live music, something authentic, something people will remember. And you're the one I thought of immediately." The guitarist sat back against the wall, stunned into silence. His guitar weighed heavy against his chest. "Me?" he said finally. "I'm not." He shook his head. "I'm just a man on a corner." "You're more than that," Elias said firmly. "You're part of this city. People know you. They feel something when they hear you. That's what I want for the restaurant, not some polished background act, something real, someone real." The guitarist felt heat rise in his chest, part disbelief, part unease. He'd lived on this corner for so long, his songs weaving into the daily rhythm of strangers. The idea of playing under a roof, in front of seated people in a place with menus and tablecloths, it felt distant, almost absurd. "I don't belong in a place like that," he said softly. "Why not?" Elias asked. The guitarist searched for an answer. His mind flitted to the holes in his jacket, the wear in his shoes, the nights he'd spent sleeping rough, the times he'd wondered if the music mattered at all, or if it was just noise to most people. "Because I'm not good enough," he admitted. The words came out raw. I never was. Elias crouched slightly, bringing his face closer to the guitarist's. His eyes were steady, unwavering. You don't see it, he said, but we do. The city does. You matter to me, to Lena, to countless others. Do you really think you've played here all these years and left nothing behind? The guitarist opened his mouth, then closed it. The street sounds filled the pause. Traffic lights ticking, a bus braking, a child laughing somewhere across the way. He stared down at his guitar, the strings dull beneath the noonlight. Elias straightened again. Think about it. No pressure. I'll come back in a few days. But I'd be honored to have you at my place. You deserve more than this corner. And with that, he slipped a card into the guitar case. A thick, embossed rectangle with the restaurant's name, Romero's Table, printed in clean black letters. Then Elias nodded once, like a man who'd said all he needed to say, and walked away into the crowd. The guitarist stared at the card for a long while. The letters blurred before his eyes. Around him, the city kept moving, the tide of strangers flowing on, as though nothing at all had shifted. But inside him, something had cracked open, a possibility he hadn't let himself imagine in years. Still, as his fingers returned to the strings, the music faltered. His hands felt uncertain, as though they didn't know how to play anymore. The offer sat in his chest like a weight, hope tangled with fear, possibility bound to doubt. And though he kept playing until the evening set in, his thoughts stayed on Elias's words, circling them over and over like a refrain he couldn't let go. Chapter 7: The Weight of Doubt. The guitarist didn't sleep much that night. He had tried, laying his guitar carefully against the wall of his small room, stretching out on the narrow bed, listening to the hum of the city through the cracked window. But every time he closed his eyes, Elias's words returned to him. You deserve more than this corner. The phrase unsettled him. It rolled around in his chest like a stone in water, bumping against his ribs, impossible to ignore. By dawn he rose, weary-eyed, pulling on his worn jacket and slinging the guitar over his back. The city was still soft in the early light. Shopkeepers lifted shutters. A street cleaner brushed leaves into a pile. The smell of baking bread drifted from the corner bakery. He walked slowly, his boots scuffing against the damp sidewalk, wondering whether he even wanted to play that morning. At his corner, he set down the case, leaned against the bricks, and sat in silence. His hands rested on the guitar, but he couldn't bring himself to strum. His head was crowded with voices from the past. The teacher who told him he'd never make it, the bandmate who left him for steadier work, the woman who once loved him but grew tired of a dream that earned nothing. He had heard words like Elias's before, promises, praise, offers that seemed bright until they withered. He had taken chances once, and each time he had ended up back here, on this corner, with nothing but 6 strings between himself and the noise of the city. Why should this time be different? By mid-morning, people began to notice his stillness. A few glanced toward him, confused at the silence where music usually was. One child tugged at her mother's sleeve, pointing at the man with the silent guitar. The mother smiled gently, whispered something, and led the child on. Finally, almost out of guilt, he began to play. But the notes were thin, distracted. His fingers stumbled, missing the clarity he usually held even on tired days. The music felt forced, like words spoken without belief. "Not your usual self today," came a voice. He looked up. It was Lena, the young woman who had returned just days before. She wore a light coat this time, her umbrella tucked under her arm, her hair loose around her shoulders. She studied him with a concern that made him uneasy. "Just tired," he muttered. She didn't look convinced, or thinking too hard about something. He gave a small, humorless laugh. "Maybe both." "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked gently, crouching beside his case. He hesitated. Part of him wanted to keep it locked inside to protect the fragile doubts that made up his daily armor. But another part, worn thin by the sleepless night, wanted to let the words out. "There was a man," he said finally. "Came yesterday. Offered me work at a restaurant. Said I should play there, regular nights." Lena's eyes widened. "That's wonderful. He shook his head. It's not for me. Why not? He gripped the guitar tighter. Because I've tried before. I've played in places, bars, little clubs, and each time it ended the same way. People wanted background noise, not music. Or they wanted something I couldn't give. I was too quiet, too... me. Lena tilted her head. And yet you've been here all these years, still playing. Because here, no one expects anything, he said bitterly. If someone doesn't like it, they walk on. If they do, they stop. I don't have to prove anything. She watched him for a long moment, then softly, but maybe you already have. The words made him flinch. He thought of Elias again, and of the look in his eyes, the same look Lena had when she spoke of that failed exam, the certainty that his music had mattered. But he couldn't accept it, not yet. After Lena left, he played on, though his hands shook with every chord. Memories pressed closer now. He remembered his youth, his first guitar, bought second-hand with money saved from sweeping floors at a hardware store. The way he used to dream of stages, of lights, of crowds listening in reverent silence. He remembered the band he joined in his 20s, the small gigs in smoky rooms, how they broke apart one by one until he was left with nothing but his guitar in the corner. Each memory was a reminder. He had failed before. He would fail again. That evening, when the crowds thinned and the lamps buzzed to life, he picked up the card Elias had left in his case. Romero's Table, the letters crisp and clear. He turned it over and over in his hands, the edges softening under his thumb. Then, with a sudden heaviness, he slipped it into his pocket instead of throwing it away. At home, he placed the guitar in its spot, sat on the bed, and stared at the ceiling. The card burned against his chest. He wanted to believe. He wanted to trust. But trust had betrayed him before, and music had always been the cruelest betrayer of all, promising everything, delivering little. And so he told himself he would stay put, that he belonged to the street, not to stages, that his place was here, unnoticed but steady. Yet even as he convinced himself, he couldn't shake Elias's words. They echoed through him in the dark, circling, restless. You deserve more than this corner. And for the first time in years, he wondered if it might be true. Chapter 8. Songs in the Dark. The days that followed Elias's visit seemed both longer and shorter than usual. Time had a way of folding in on itself when the guitarist's thoughts grew heavy, stretching moments until they felt endless, then snapping them away before he could fully grasp them. He played, as always, on his corner. The music came and went, sometimes full and steady, other times halting. People noticed. The man with 2 newspapers raised an eyebrow one morning, as if the silence between songs was unusual. The barista across the street lingered longer at the doorway, listening, then retreating with a puzzled look. Lena passed by twice in those days, each time offering a small smile, each time pausing as though she wanted to ask if he had decided anything. He gave her nothing but music in response, too tangled in himself to put words to it. At night, though, when he returned to his small room, he couldn't shake the card from his mind. It lay on the table beside his bed, the thick paper catching the dim light of the lamp. Sometimes he picked it up and ran his thumb along the embossed letters. Sometimes he shoved it into a drawer, hoping to forget it. But always, by morning, it found its way back into sight, as if reminding him that the question was still waiting. One evening, restless, he set out walking instead of going straight home. The city's streets were alive with weekend energy, couples strolling arm in arm, children tugging their parents toward bright windows, laughter spilling out of doorways where music played louder than his ever did on the corner. He walked with no clear direction, his guitar strapped to his back, the familiar weight both comforting and burdensome. Without realizing it, his feet carried him downtown. The buildings grew taller, the lights sharper, the sidewalks more crowded. And then, as he turned a corner, he saw it. Romero's Table. The restaurant stood at the edge of a busy block, its windows glowing warm against the night. Inside, people filled the tables, their faces animated, the clink of glasses visible even through the glass. A sign above the door bore Elias's name in clean lettering. The place looked nothing like the dim bars of his past. No smoke curling through the air, no impatient chatter drowning out the music. This place looked alive, welcoming. He stopped across the street, rooted to the spot. His chest tightened. He imagined himself inside, sitting on a stool, near the corner of the dining room, guitar in hand. He imagined people pausing their conversations to listen, turning their heads toward him. And the thought made his palms sweat. He couldn't cross. Not yet. Instead, he slipped down a side street and found himself behind the building. There, the sounds were different. The clatter of dishes through a back door, the hiss of steam, the bark of a chef's orders. He lingered in the shadows, listening, trying to piece together what it would feel like to belong in such a place. The rhythm of it both thrilled and unnerved him. For a long while, he stood there, until the chill of night seeped into his bones. Then he walked home, unsettled. The next day, he tried to lose himself in music again. He played longer hours, his fingers blistering on the strings as though more sound could drown out the voice in his head. But each song seemed to turn back toward the same refrain. You deserve more than this corner. Late that night, when the crowds had thinned and the lamps buzzed, he found himself playing something new. It wasn't a tune he had practiced or even thought of before. It came from a raw place, born of doubt and longing. The melody rose and fell unevenly, sometimes stumbling, sometimes soaring, as if searching for something it could never quite reach. A small group of people stopped to listen. A man in a work uniform, his sleeves rolled up and his face lined with fatigue. A woman carrying grocery bags, setting them down at her feet as she closed her eyes. A teenager on a bike, leaning on the handlebars, motionless. They stayed, and they listened, and when he finished, they clapped softly, hesitant at first, then stronger. The sound startled him. He looked up and saw gratitude in their faces, something quiet but certain. And in that moment, he realized that maybe Elias was right. That maybe all these years, he had been more than background noise. But just as quickly, fear closed in again. He could not shake the memory of his failures, the times when he thought he was ready only to fall. He told himself the applause was just politeness, that people were kind when it cost them nothing. Still, when he went home that night, the new song echoed in his mind. It followed him into his dreams, carrying the voices of strangers who had paused, if only for a moment, to let his music hold them. He woke in the dark, restless, the city hushed around him. He sat at the edge of the bed, guitar across his lap, and played softly into the stillness. The notes filled the small room, fragile but unbroken. And for the first time in years, he wondered if the corner was no longer enough. Chapter 9. The World Beneath. The tunnel walls bled color in streaks of phosphorescence, lines of blue and violet shimmering like veins of trapped lightning. The group moved slowly, the sound of their boots echoing off the stone, merging with the faint hum that seemed to pulse from somewhere deep within the cavern. Alex kept his hand close to his weapon, though his other hand brushed along the wall every so often, as if grounding himself in something solid. The air was cooler here, fresher, laced with moisture that clung to their skin. Drops fell occasionally from the stalactites above, pattering on the stone with delicate, patient rhythm. Feels like we're walking through a throat, Cass muttered, her flashlight beam cutting through the dark. Like this whole cave is alive. No kidding, Eli said, his voice quiet but tinged with nerves. If it starts swallowing, I'm out. The attempt at humor drew a shaky laugh from the group, though it quickly died. None of them could shake the impression that the cave was more than rock, that it was watching. They pressed forward, each step revealing more of the strange subterranean world. Soon the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. The walls stretched out and up until they vanished into shadows. Bridges of stone arched across the cavern, crisscrossing over a river that glowed faintly green, its surface shifting as though alive with whispers. Holy hell, Alex breathed. No one spoke for a moment. They simply stood there, dwarfed by the immensity. This wasn't a natural formation. The bridges were too smooth, the angles too deliberate. Architecture, ancient and alien, carved into the bones of the earth. Maya knelt, brushing her fingers over the ground. Strange symbols were etched into the stone, shallow grooves filled with faint light. They pulsed in patterns like a heartbeat. "These are like the markings from the ruins on the surface," she said, frowning, "but older, more complete." Cass swung her flashlight in an arc. "So who built all this, and why underground?" No one answered. They crossed the first bridge, its surface smooth and strangely warm beneath their boots. The green river below shifted, bubbles rising and popping like breath from a sleeping giant. The smell of ozone lingered, sharp and metallic, burning faintly in their throats. Halfway across, Eli froze. "Did you hear that?" Everyone stilled. A low rumble traveled through the stone beneath their feet, so subtle it might have been mistaken for their imagination. But then it grew, a tremor that shook the bridge, causing pebbles to scatter into the glowing water below. "Run!" Alex shouted. They sprinted, the rumble crescendoing into a roar. Behind them, the bridge cracked, pieces collapsing into the river in a cascade of stone. The water hissed, boiling as debris struck it, the light flaring brighter with each splash. The group barely made it to the other side, tumbling onto the platform. Alex turned, chest heaving, as the bridge gave way entirely, disappearing into the glowing current. "Well," Cass gasped, "guess there's no going back." "Forward then," Maya said, though her voice trembled. They pressed deeper into the chamber, passing through an arched doorway that led into a long hall. Here the symbols became more frequent, covering the walls and ceiling in glowing constellations. As they walked, the patterns shifted subtly, rearranging themselves like a language trying to be read. Maya slowed, staring. "It's guiding us." "What makes you say that?" Eli asked. "Because the lines change direction every time we stop," she replied, her voice tinged with awe. "It wants us to follow." "Or it wants to lead us to a trap," Cass countered. But still, they followed. The hall emptied into another chamber, smaller but no less strange. In the center rose a stone pedestal, atop which rested a sphere of glass. Inside the sphere swirled motes of light, shifting like tiny galaxies colliding. Alex approached slowly. "What is it?" Maya joined him, her eyes wide. "It looks like some kind of memory core, a data storage, but alive." Cass arched a brow. "Alive? It's a ball." Before anyone could stop her, Maya reached out. Her fingers brushed the glass. The chamber erupted in light. Symbols blazed across the walls, racing in spirals, and a sound like 1,000 whispers filled their heads. Images flashed in Alex's vision. Worlds fractured, cities swallowed by light, people crying out as their skies burned. And then, figures cloaked in shadows, placing spheres like this one into the earth, burying them deep as though hiding secrets from time itself. The light dimmed. Maya staggered back, clutching her head. Alex caught her by the arm. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded shakily. It showed me something. A collapse. A countdown." Cass's expression tightened. "Countdown to what?" Before Maya could answer, the ground shuddered again. This time, it wasn't the slow tremor of before. It was violent, cracking stone and raining dust from the ceiling. Eli cursed. "Not again." From the cracks in the walls, something seeped. Black liquid, thick and oily, crawling like it had a will of its own. It gathered, pooling, then rising, shapes forming from the ooze. Limbs, torsos, faces, half-formed but twisted, as if sculpted by nightmares. The group backed toward the pedestal. Alex raised his weapon, but the shadows multiplied, climbing from every direction. Their bodies dripped and reshaped, never solid, yet radiating hunger. "They're like the things we fought topside," Cass said, pulling her blade free. "Only worse." The first shadow lunged. Alex fired, the shot tearing through it, scattering the black liquid. But it reformed instantly, the wound closing. "Bullets don't work!" Eli shouted, panic flaring. Maya looked around frantically, then back at the glowing sphere. "It's connected to this place. Maybe it can help." Without waiting, she slammed her hand onto the sphere again. The light inside flared, racing up her arm, wrapping around her body in threads of energy. Her eyes glowed white as symbols lit beneath her feet. The shadows shrieked, staggering back as if burned by the sudden brilliance. "Maya!" Alex called, but she didn't respond. She was somewhere else, lost in the storm of light. The chamber trembled harder, dust falling in sheets. The river outside roared like a storm unleashed. Cass grabbed Alex's arm. "We need to get out of here before this whole place comes down." "But Maya, she'll die if we stay." Eli pointed to a narrow passage opening on the far wall, revealed by the shifting symbols. "There! It's giving us a way out." The shadows regrouped, circling. Maya stood rigid, her body glowing brighter, light spilling from her mouth as if she was a vessel overflowing. "Go!" she screamed, her voice echoing with power not her own. "I'll hold them." Alex's chest clenched. Every part of him wanted to fight, to drag her with them. But the look in her eyes was absolute. She wasn't asking. She was commanding. Cass yanked him toward the passage. "Move, Alex." They ran, the walls collapsing behind them, shadows shrieking as Maya's light consumed the chamber. The last thing Alex saw as he glanced back was her standing tall, arms spread, her body burning like a star against the tide of darkness. Then the passage sealed behind them, cutting off the light. Silence, except for their ragged breaths. They stumbled into another tunnel, the floor slick with moisture, the walls humming faintly. The symbols here were dimmer, weaker, as though Maya's sacrifice had drained the life from them. Eli leaned against the wall, pale and trembling. We left her." Alex said nothing. His fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles ached. His mind screamed that she was gone, but something inside refused to believe it. Cass sheathed her blade slowly, her jaw tight. "If she's still alive, we'll find her." Alex looked down the tunnel, stretching endlessly ahead, the hum growing louder, almost like a heartbeat. The world beneath wasn't done with them yet, and neither was he. Chapter 10. The First Step. The next morning, the city was drenched in sunlight, clean and sharp after a rainstorm that had left the sidewalks glistening and the leaves trembling with droplets. The air smelled faintly of ozone, whetstone, and bread baking somewhere in the blocks below. He stepped onto his usual corner, guitar slung over his shoulder, hands shaking slightly despite the warmth of the morning. For hours, he played as he always did, but something was different. His hands moved on their own, almost compulsively, as if the strings knew the thoughts racing through his mind before he did. Each chord echoed with the weight of the past week, the return of Lena, Elias's offer, the taste of possibility that had unsettled him to the core. People moved past him, as usual, but he noticed their faces more acutely now. A young couple holding hands, whispering to each other, smiling at some private joke. A man in a mechanic's uniform paused briefly, listening, his eyes softening. A child tripped over a loose stone and cried until the mother scooped him up and carried him past, the sounds of the street blending into the music that seemed to follow him like a shadow. He played not for them, not really, but for himself. For the first time in years, he allowed the music to carry the weight of all his doubts, fears, and unspoken dreams. Then, as the sun rose higher, warming the bricks at his back, he found a note tucked into his guitar case. Small, clean, the handwriting precise and deliberate. "Meet me tonight. 7 p.m. Romero's table." No signature, no hint of who had left it, but he already knew. Elias. His stomach nodded. He had told himself he wouldn't go, that the corner was safe, that he was unworthy of a restaurant stage and of praise, of attention. And yet the note had found him unassuming yet insistent. For hours, he walked the city in circles, thinking, talking to himself under his breath, strumming at air and strings alike. Every argument he made to stay away, the failures, the rejections, the safety of the familiar, was countered by images of Elias's eyes, Lena's encouragement, and the memory of those who had paused in front of him over the years to simply listen. The hours slipped past unnoticed. Shadows grew long across the pavement, lamps flickered to life, and the city hummed with evening activity. At 6:45, he tightened the strap of his guitar, feeling the leather bite into his shoulder. He had made the choice before he even realized it. He would go. But what would he find? Fear gnawed at him as he approached the restaurant. He stopped just outside, watching from across the street as the warm glow of the interior spilled onto the sidewalk. Patrons laughed, glasses clinked. Waitstaff moved efficiently through the dining room. Everything looked like a picture, carefully composed and real. And he felt like an intruder, a man who had no right to this place, no claim to the beauty of this moment. He lingered on the sidewalk, guitar case in hand, heart hammering in his chest. Memories flashed unbidden. The boy who cried after failing a test, the couple who had danced to him in the square, the solitary woman who had listened and whispered a quiet thank you. Their lives had intersected with his music, sometimes in ways he hadn't realized until long after the fact. And yet, for all their gratitude, he had felt invisible, unworthy. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. The door opened under his hand before he could knock, as if welcoming him in by default. Warm light and the scent of bread, roasted vegetables, and the faint tang of wine enveloped him. A hostess looked up, smiled, and gestured toward the small stage in the corner. "You're right on time," she said politely. He hesitated, then set down his case. The guitar rested against him like a trusted companion, grounding him. He took the stage slowly, feeling the wood beneath his boots, the small vibration of the floor under the weight of his body. Elias appeared then, moving through the tables toward him. The smile was gentle, patient, as if he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. "You made it," Elias said. I wasn't sure," the guitarist admitted, voice low. "I'm not sure I belong here." "You do," Elias said simply. "More than you know." The room quieted as the diners noticed the man on the stage, not with expectation but with curiosity. They didn't know him, yet something in the air said this wasn't going to be ordinary background music. He picked up the guitar, fingers trembling slightly, and placed them on the strings. The first chord rang out, a clear, soft note that carried through the space. It was strange, stepping into the spotlight, feeling the eyes of strangers upon him. His corner had been safe because no one really looked, or if they did, it was fleeting. Here the attention was immediate, and it pressed against him like the city itself. He started to play. The first few notes were careful, almost hesitant. Then, as he settled into the rhythm, the music grew confident, bold. The melodies he had strummed 1,000 times on cold streets and empty sidewalks now filled a room designed to be heard. He played not for coins, not for approval, but because he had to, because the music had always been a part of him that could not be silenced. And as the diners listened, something remarkable happened. Faces softened, conversations hushed. Even the clatter of dishes seemed to slow, allowing the music to claim the space. Some closed their eyes, leaning into the sound as if it could reach into the parts of them they had forgotten existed. The guitarist realized then, with a shock, that he was not performing for himself. He was performing for every person who had ever stopped, for every soul that had felt a spark of comfort or joy from his strings. Each chord was a connection, a bridge between him and the lives he had touched, whether he had known it or not. Tears pricked his eyes, not of sorrow but of recognition, of understanding. His music mattered, not because it had brought him attention or fame, but because it had carried others through moments of life they would remember forever. When he finally lifted his hands from the strings, the room was still. A beat, 2 beats, and then a ripple of applause broke across the space. It was different from the casual coins tossed into his case. It was acknowledgement, gratitude, respect. Elias stepped forward, clapping softly, a smile on his face that made the guitarist's chest ache. "You see," Elias said quietly, "this is where you belong. You've been part of this city all along, but here, people can see it too." The guitarist nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. For the first time, he understood that belonging wasn't about stages, spotlights, or recognition. It was about presence. About the way his music threaded through lives, connecting strangers, reminding them that they were not alone. And as he played into the night, the music no longer trembled with doubt. It soared with certainty, each note a promise, each chord a bridge, each song a gift. Tonight, the corner was gone, replaced by a space filled with people who would remember him. And in that realization, he found something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: redemption. The first step had been terrifying, but it was also alive. And as he looked around the room, catching glimpses of faces reflecting the light of his music, he knew one thing for certain: he had finally come home. Chapter 11. The Rhythm of Belonging. The mornings after that first night at Romero's table were quieter, softer than the chaotic city streets he had grown accustomed to. The guitarist woke to sunlight filtering through his window, dust motes dancing in the golden light like tiny planets in a slow orbit. Even the city beyond his small room seemed to breathe differently now, as if acknowledging that something had shifted, not just in him, but in the world around him. He packed his guitar carefully, making sure the strings were tuned and the case locked, yet the weight in his hands felt less like burden and more like promise. The walk to the restaurant was no longer a hesitant crossing of city streets. It was a path he knew he could traverse with purpose. Yet still, a flutter of nerves traveled up his spine. Romero's table was alive with its usual rhythm: the low hum of conversations, the clatter of plates, the faint scent of roasting herbs drifting from the kitchen. Staff moved efficiently, glancing at him as he stepped toward the small stage tucked into the corner of the dining room. Elias greeted him with the same warm smile, a silent encouragement that spoke volumes. "You ready?" Elias asked, voice calm but insistent. "As ready as I'll ever be," he replied, setting down his case. The first night, the diners were patient. Some knew his music, having heard the story whispered from friends or caught glimpses of his corner performances. Others were here for the first time, curious, unsure what to expect. He closed his eyes and let his fingers find the strings, and the music, timid at first, soon grew confident, stretching across the room. It was different from the street. Here, people paused. They listened, sometimes leaning forward in their chairs, sometimes closing their eyes entirely. Their faces reflected something unfamiliar: intent, curiosity, emotion. No longer just background noise in a noisy city, his music became the pulse of a small universe within the restaurant. After the first set, Elias approached quietly. "You did well," he said, nodding toward him. "You're finding your rhythm." "I'm just nervous," the guitarist admitted. "I've never had an audience that was actually listening before, not like this." "You're not performing for them," Elias corrected gently. "You're sharing with them. There's a difference." The distinction settled in his chest like a soft weight. He had always thought of music as a performance, a way to be seen, acknowledged, validated. But now, as he glanced across the room and saw diners swaying slightly, mouthing lyrics under their breath, catching the subtle harmonies, he understood. This was connection. Music as bridge. Music as lifeline. In the days that followed, a pattern emerged. He arrived in the late afternoon playing for the early diners and stayed until the last table closed. Sometimes Lena came, sitting quietly at the back, offering a small smile when their eyes met. Sometimes other friends, people he had known in passing on the corner, found him, watching him with the same gentle awe they had once reserved for coins in his case. Each night the music felt different. It carried the memory of his corner, the lives he had brushed against unknowingly. There was the man who had cried in front of him after losing a job, now older, sipping coffee at a corner table. There was the woman who had listened silently in grief, now smiling across the room at her family. Every note was threaded with memory, layered with unspoken stories that he could not have imagined would follow him here. But it wasn't easy. Not every night was a triumph. There were evenings when nerves gnawed at him, when his fingers stumbled across the strings, when he doubted every note. Patrons murmured softly, some glancing impatiently at their watches or picking up their phones to drown out the imperfections. And yet, on those nights, Elias would find him afterward, place a hand on his shoulder and offer the same steady reassurance. Every song matters, even when you can't see it. The city beyond the restaurant continued to bustle, indifferent and relentless, but he felt insulated within the warm glow of the dining room. And yet, the corner called to him, a ghostly tether. Some mornings, he would leave the restaurant early and wander down streets he hadn't touched in years, listening for the echoes of coins hitting his case, the muffled laughter, the accidental moments of shared humanity. It reminded him why he had begun in the first place, why music had been both sanctuary and obsession. One evening, during a quiet moment between sets, he noticed a man standing near the bar watching him intently. Their eyes met briefly. Recognition flared. It was the boy who had cried on his corner years ago, grown now, shoulders broad and confident. A man who had faced life and survived. After the performance, the man approached. "I don't know if you remember me," he said, voice low. "I was 10 years old. I cried after failing a test. You were there playing and I don't know. It helped." The guitarist's throat tightened. "I remember. I wanted to thank you," the man continued. "Your music, it stayed with me." The words landed like stones dropped in water, rippling across his heart. It was one thing to imagine the lives he had touched. It was another to see the proof. The boy, now a man, stood before him, gratitude and humility etched into his expression. The night ended differently from any other. Patrons left with smiles, lingering on the doorway, whispering words he could not hear but could feel. Elias clapped softly as he packed away his guitar, the warmth of approval like sunlight over stone. "You're doing more than playing," Elias said. "You're weaving a history, one note at a time." For the first time, he allowed himself to believe it. Not the accolades, not the attention, but the knowledge that he mattered, that his music could carry people through life's quiet victories and secret heartbreaks. As he walked home, the city stretched around him, familiar and new at once. The streetlights glimmered in puddles, each reflection a shard of possibility. The hum of traffic, the distant voices, the faint scent of bread and rain. It all felt connected now, like the first chords of a song that had been playing just out of reach. He paused on a bridge overlooking the river, guitar slung over his back, and let the wind carry his thoughts. The city was vast, full of lives intersecting in ways he would never fully know. And yet, he had carved a space in that web, a note that would linger long after he was gone. Somewhere down the street, a child laughed. A couple argued softly. A musician played a tune just out of reach. And he smiled, understanding finally that the music had always been enough. It had always mattered. Tonight, he would return to Romero's table. He would play again, each note a quiet triumph, each chord a bridge to someone who needed to hear it. And as the city breathed around him, he realized that redemption was not in fame or fortune. It was in knowing, at long last, that he had touched lives, that he had mattered, and that the music had been his way of connecting all along. Chapter 12. Crescendo of Lives. The city was alive in ways he had never fully noticed before. Lights glimmered across wet pavements like tiny constellations fallen to earth, and the hum of the evening traffic blended with distant sirens, bicycle bells, and the muted laughter of passers-by. Every sound seemed to reverberate against him, echoing the rhythms he had spent a lifetime coaxing from his guitar strings. He arrived at Romero's table earlier than usual, the golden light from inside spilling onto the street and pulling him toward it like a beacon. His case felt heavier than ever, not with the weight of the instrument, but with the expectation of the evening, the knowledge that tonight would not be ordinary. He had begun to understand the power of music, not just in its ability to fill space, but to reach into the hidden folds of a person's heart. And tonight, he would see how far it could go. Elias greeted him at the door with a smile that carried both pride and anticipation. "You're on time," he said simply, though his eyes betrayed more. "Tonight, you'll see something you've never seen before." The guitarist swallowed, nodding, and carried his instrument to the stage. The room was already alive with conversation, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. But tonight, there was a quiet anticipation that made the usual hum seem subdued. Patrons glanced toward him as he set down his case, some with curiosity, some with recognition, and some with nothing but the ordinary anonymity of being a city dweller. He tuned his guitar, the strings humming in response, and took a deep breath. The first chord rang out, soft yet confident, filling the space with a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the walls themselves. It was a simple note, pure and unadorned, but it carried the weight of a decade's worth of unseen connection. As he played, he noticed faces leaning in. Not everyone, but enough. A young woman with her head bent over a notebook paused to lift her pen. A man in a business suit set down his phone, forgotten for a moment. An elderly couple clasped hands across the table, the lines on their faces softening as if touched by a gentle wind. Each note became a thread, weaving through the room, binding strangers in a shared experience they could not articulate. The guitarist realized that he was no longer performing for validation. He was performing to witness, to acknowledge, to connect. The melodies swelled, rising and falling like waves, carrying the accumulated emotion of years spent on the corner, in the shadows of unnoticed streets. Memories of those he had encountered along the way, brief intersections of lives that had never seemed to matter, came flooding back. The boy who had cried on a rainy afternoon now sat across the room as a man, smiling quietly. The couple who had danced to his music in the square years ago were celebrating their anniversary here tonight, eyes twinkling in the candlelight. The woman who had once listened in grief now laughed softly at a joke shared across her table, her shoulders eased by a music that had once offered solace. He realized, in a moment of clarity, that each note was more than sound. Each chord was a touchstone, a vessel for memory, a reminder that people, strangers, acquaintances, even fleeting passers-by, carried pieces of his music with them through life. And in turn, their lives had been embedded in his music, shaping it, enriching it, giving it meaning beyond what he had ever imagined. A hush fell over the room as he transitioned into a new melody, one that had formed in his mind but never fully been played. The notes danced, intertwined, telling a story of joy, of sorrow, of moments unnoticed yet eternally preserved in the folds of human experience. He played not for applause, not for recognition, but because it was necessary, because the music had always existed in him, waiting for moments like this to fully reveal its purpose. A patron, an older man with silver hair and a gentle smile, leaned forward. You play like you know everyone in this city," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Like you've lived 1,000 lives here." The guitarist paused, caught off guard. His fingers hovered over the strings, unsure how to respond. And then he realized the truth, in a way he had. Every life he had touched, every silent gratitude, every fleeting smile, he had carried it all, absorbed it, and now reflected it back in this music. Elias approached, standing silently at the side of the stage. "They see it," he said softly, "and so will you, soon enough." The guitarist nodded, letting the words settle. He continued to play, pouring everything he had into the music. The room seemed to breathe with him, each note a pulse shared between him and every listener. There was laughter, soft sobs, quiet murmurs of recognition. The music did not merely fill the space, it transformed it, reshaping it into something alive, something eternal. Then, at the height of the performance, something shifted. The room seemed to expand, the walls dissolving into a haze of golden light. The music became not just sound, but presence, tangible and potent. Patrons reached instinctively, touching the air as if they could capture the melody itself. The guitarist felt it in his chest, a resonance so deep it bordered on physical pain. And he understood. He had doubted, hesitated, and hidden behind the safe anonymity of the corner for years. He had feared failure, rejection, invisibility. But the music had always mattered. He had always mattered, not in ways measured by money, fame, or even recognition, but in ways that rippled silently through the lives he encountered. Every moment of connection, every silent acknowledgement, every tear, every smile, they were his redemption. They were proof of presence, of meaning, of love in its quietest, most persistent form. The final chord rang out, resounding through the restaurant and beyond. Patrons erupted in applause, some standing, some leaning toward the stage, eyes glistening with emotion. Elias clapped softly, eyes shining with pride, but the guitarist hardly noticed. He felt the echo of every life he had touched, the invisible strings connecting him to the world outside the corner, and for the first time, he did not want to hide. He lowered the guitar slowly, tears streaming unbidden down his cheeks. The room waited, breathless, and in that silence, he felt a fullness he had never known. Redemption was not a destination. It was this moment, the recognition that he had mattered all along, that his music had carried people through weddings, heartbreaks, recoveries, and quiet triumphs. That connection was eternal, even if fleeting in physical form. After the performance, patrons lingered, many approaching to share words of gratitude, stories of moments his music had accompanied, memories of afternoons spent listening from street corners. The guitarist listened, nodded, and smiled, each interaction a reaffirmation of what he had only just begun to understand. Elias placed a hand on his shoulder. "You see it now, don't you?" he asked. I do," he whispered. "I really do." The night stretched on, each song a testament to the lives woven into his music. And as he played, he realized something profound. The city, with all its chaos, its noise, its indifference, had always been a canvas. His music was not just sound, it was presence, memory, connection. And in that, he had found his place, his purpose, his redemption. For the first time in years, he did not worry about tomorrow, about judgment, about worthiness. He simply played, each note a thread in the tapestry of the city, each chord a bridge between hearts, each song a quiet declaration. I was here, I mattered, and so did you. The applause lingered, echoing long after the last note faded. Patrons departed with smiles, whispers of gratitude, and a warmth that remained long after the doors closed. Elias lingered, silent, watching, and the guitarist felt a hand on his shoulder, steady, grounding, affirming. In that moment, he understood fully that the journey had not been about a stage, a restaurant, or recognition. It had been about connection, about the subtle, invisible threads that link lives together. And as he packed his guitar for the night, the city's heartbeat thrummed beneath him, a reminder that he was no longer alone, and that he had always mattered. Chapter 13. A Song That Lasts. The city waited for no one, yet somehow, for him, it paused. That evening, the streets seemed softer, the traffic distant, the neon lights shimmering like a reflection of the music that had always coursed through the veins of the city itself. The guitarist walked toward Romero's table with a strange clarity, each step deliberate, his guitar case swinging lightly at his side. The rhythm of the city matched the rhythm of his heartbeat, steady, confident, alive. He remembered the first day he had set foot on the corner a decade ago. A boy trembling with unplayed notes, a man unsure if his music mattered. Every coin tossed into his case, every fleeting smile, every nod of acknowledgement had been part of a quiet, invisible tapestry. And now, finally, he understood the full pattern. The restaurant was warm, glowing from within like a hearth in the heart of the city. Patrons had begun to arrive early, some whispering among themselves, others settling at tables in expectant silence. Word had spread. Tonight would be special. And though he felt a flicker of nerves, it was tempered by something stronger. A quiet assurance, a trust in the power of his music, in the bridge it had always built between lives. Elias met him at the door, eyes shining with pride. "Tonight," he said softly, "it's not just about the music. It's about the connections you've created, the people whose lives you've touched." The guitarist nodded, swallowing hard. "I think I understand now. I finally do." Inside, the dining room was alive with anticipation. Patrons whispered, glasses clinked softly, the staff moved with precise efficiency. And then he was on stage, guitar in hand, the warm glow of the overhead lights washing over him. The first note rang out, delicate, luminous, vibrating through the room like the first breath of dawn. He closed his eyes and played, letting the melodies flow freely, effortlessly. Memories of the past decade streamed through him, threading into the music. The boy who had cried after a failed test, now grown and successful. The couple who had danced to him in a sunlit square, their hands intertwined across a table. The woman who had once listened in silence, whose life had moved forward, carrying the comfort of his music as a secret companion. Each chord was a story, each rhythm a heartbeat, each note a quiet affirmation that lives, intersected in ways unseen yet profound. He no longer played for validation. He played to witness, to honor, to connect. The audience responded. Some closed their eyes, allowing the music to wrap around them. Others swayed in their seats, caught in the current of sound. A few wept silently, the emotion spilling over like a tide they could not contain. And he saw it. The ripple effect of years spent on a city corner, the lives he had touched unknowingly, now reflected back to him in gratitude and recognition. Maya's words from long ago echoed in his mind. Music carries what words cannot. And tonight, the truth of that statement became tangible. Every note reverberated with the essence of those lives, the invisible threads connecting the city's residents to one another and to him. As he transitioned to a new piece, one he had written that morning, he felt the energy of the room intensify. Patrons leaned closer, drawn by the intimacy of the melody, the subtle interplay of rhythm and harmony. He felt his own heartbeat syncing with theirs, an unspoken communion that transcended age, background, and circumstance. Elias watched from the side, silent, witnessing a transformation that had been years in the making. "This is it," he murmured. "This is what I hoped you'd find." The guitarist's fingers moved with increasing confidence, dancing across the strings, shaping emotions into tangible sound. Laughter and tears mingled in the room, as people remembered moments of their own lives, milestones, losses, triumphs, woven together by the music that had accompanied them, often unnoticed, but always present. Somewhere in the crowd, the boy from the corner, now a man, stood, eyes glistening. He mouthed the words, a silent acknowledgement of the connection they had shared all those years ago, and the guitarist felt a warmth bloom in his chest. He was not invisible. He had mattered. He always had. The crescendo built slowly, deliberately, carrying with it the weight of a decade's worth of music, memory, and emotion. Patrons clasped hands, some with strangers, some with loved ones, as the melody washed over them. The room became a vessel for shared humanity, each note a lifeline, each chord a bridge. When the final chord rang out, it seemed to linger in the air, vibrating against the walls, the ceiling, the floor, and into the hearts of all present. Silence followed, deep and reverent, as if the city itself had stopped to listen, and then applause erupted, unrestrained, heartfelt, and overwhelming. The guitarist lowered his instrument slowly, tears streaking his cheeks, his hands trembling with a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. Elias approached, hand on his shoulder, eyes bright with pride. "You see," he said quietly, "this is what it was always about. You've given them something they'll carry with them forever. And you found your own place, your own voice." The guitarist nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I finally understand. It wasn't about fame, or recognition, or even success. It was about connection. All this time, I've been a part of something bigger than myself, and I didn't even know it." He looked around the room, catching glimpses of faces reflecting the light of his music. Smiles, tears, quiet nods of understanding. And in that moment, he felt a profound sense of belonging, a realization that he had long sought but never fully embraced. Redemption was not a distant goal. It was this moment, this music, this shared experience. As the evening wore on, patrons lingered, approaching him with stories of how his music had touched their lives, sometimes years ago, sometimes just tonight. Each interaction reinforced the truth he had discovered. His presence, his music, had mattered. Every quiet corner, every street-side performance, every note had contributed to the mosaic of connection that now stretched across the city. Later, after the last patron had left and the staff had tidied the tables, he sat alone on the stage, guitar resting in his lap. The room was quiet now, bathed in the soft glow of candlelight and city reflections filtering through the windows. He strummed gently, each note a whisper, a reflection, a continuation of the story he had begun long ago on a street corner. He thought of the people he had touched, the lives that had intersected with his music, in ways both fleeting and profound. He thought of the city, vast and relentless, yet somehow intimate, familiar, and alive. And he thought of himself, no longer a stranger, no longer invisible, no longer afraid to embrace the place he had carved out in the world. Outside, the city pulsed with life. The streets were filled with voices, lights, and motion, yet he felt a quiet harmony within, a connection to everything around him. His music was no longer a solitary act. It was a bridge, a lifeline, a thread weaving together moments, people, and memories. And as he played, softly, gently, the final realization settled in. He had found his place, his purpose, his redemption, not in accolades, not in wealth, not in recognition, but in the quiet, enduring impact of music and human connection. He had mattered all along, and now, at last, he knew it fully. The city listened, the room held its breath, and he played, letting the notes drift into the night, carrying with them the essence of every life he had touched and the promise of all those yet to come. For in the end, that was the song he had always sought. A song for the city, a song for the people, a song that would linger long after the last chord faded, a song that lasted.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, stay safe.